Hi everyone, this is William with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary Series, and I've got some entertainment for you today. We are doing one of the last few sections of the Konstantin Grunwald Letter of 3rd of June 1939. We're finally getting towards the end of it. So it's a 11-page letter. At least as the pages go on my computer. And we're up to section 20. I think the furthest we ever went with one of Dmitri's was 14 or 15, with one of his diary entries. 14 or 15 pages, that is. But I guess we better dive right into it. So our recap for 1915, well, just a nice cozy evening with General Laming at Usovo, and they made a paper chess set together. Laming made the board and Dmitri made the pieces. And yeah, sounds fun. 1939 recap. Well, just a lot about Dmitri and Lord Beaverbrook, how enthusiastic Dmitri was about Lord Beaverbrook, and how Grunwald was trying to process that and whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. And so, in the concluding sentence of that paragraph, Grunwald said that Dmitri had actually encouraged him to meet with Beaverbrook, and so he did. So that's what this very colorful long paragraph of the letter is actually about. And even though I don't think Dmitri is mentioned, but even so, what I would suggest, and what I did as I was reading this, was try to fit Dmitri into this scenario, because Dmitri had been spending a lot of time, according to Grunwald, with Beaverbrook at Beaverbrook's home, and so try to imagine Dmitri in this setting, which he certainly was in, not on this particular day, but great scene in a movie, great scene in a novel. We can put him right into the center of it, or even just do it with Grunwald, and it's very entertaining. Okay. Our cast today, well, it's large, but there are two in particular that make me laugh because of their names, and because the two of them with these two names are together in this one place. We have Peregrine Cust and Valentine Brown. So Cust is spelled C-U-S-T, and you know they sound right out like they're right out of some kids book, right? Peregrine Cust and Valentine Brown, like a Roald Dahl book. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory or something like that. Anyway, that's our first bit of entertainment. Not that I'm putting these two individuals down. It's not their fault, but their parents named them. So here we go. This is Grunwald. So during my last trip to London, I had Sunday lunch at his home, him being Beaverbrook. That was an extremely interesting experience. A big house in doubtful taste, an enormous park with a magnificent panoramic view, wooded hills, and as for guests, Lord and Lady Brownlow, who seemed to have completely broken with the Duke of Windsor, Viscount Castleross, or Castlerossi, with his divorcee wife, a few other lesser-known individuals. Castlerossi is a large, extremely amusing man. His conversation is much wittier than the platitudes he writes every week in the Sunday Express. He's treated a bit like the court jester. Beaverbrook reigns over the whole society like a true feudal lord. During the meal, he summoned a secretary to read aloud a letter from the aviation ministry. This secretary stood behind the guests. I've never seen anything like it outside of a Shakespeare play. After the meal, we barely had time to light our cigars when we were invited to attend a film screening in a little toy theater. I'm going to interject here. This is my lame translation of Théâtre Bonbonnière, so candy theater. I don't know what to do with Candy Theater. Apparently it was just a small cinema in the house, so I'll repeat that. We were invited to attend a film screening in a little toy theater. We took our places on a kind of balcony while the butler and valet sat in the armchairs of the parterre. I will skip the other picturesque details, which would remind you, madam, of the habits of your American billionaires. Although the general conversation was about trivial matters, I had the opportunity to have a one-on-one conversation with the master of the house. He began by telling me that he was sorry that Madame Maisky was in Geneva and couldn't be present at our meeting. Next, he wanted to hear my opinion on the possibility of a reconciliation with Moscow. I replied immediately that we all wanted it, but it was still a long distance off because Moscow was not at all ready for it. There was nothing to be done with Stalin, and things had to be allowed to ripen and be observed. That Russia should be studied for a long time, and decisions must not be hastily made. He listened very attentively and asked me various questions, from which I concluded that he was very intelligent, understood things very well, and played the fool without actually being one. We agreed to have a second, more extended conversation on his next trip to Paris. In fact, he just spent a few days here, but I didn't have the chance to see him again because his time was all taken up. So, had he ever actually intended to meet again with Grunwald? I don't know. Here we go. Peregrine Cust. Who was he? He was Baron Brownlow. He was 40 years old that year, and he had been one of Edward the Eighth, one of Edward the Prince of Wales, who was called David, one of his inner circle, one of his closest friends. Both him and Wallace, although he tried to dissuade David from marrying Wallace Simpson, and he had also tried to dissuade Wallace Simpson from marrying the Prince of Wales. And so Grunwald is right when he remarks that their relationship has now been broken off. He says, Lord and Lady Brownlow, who seemed to have completely broken with the Duke of Windsor, and that was true. After the marriage actually took place, despite Brownlow's best efforts and other people's best efforts, Brownlow was finished with the Duke of Windsor, and the Duke of Windsor was finished with him. Okay, I don't know if Dmitri knew Baron Brownlow or his wife, but I do know that Dmitri knew Edward/David way back in 1919, 1920. He had occasion to meet him and be around him, and he did not like him. Whether that changed later on, I don't know. He was never, I'm sure they knew each other, they were acquaintances, but at least he was never, when he was in England, he was never part of Edward's set. And simply in earlier years had remarked that he didn't like the man. Okay, anyway. I should say Baroness Brownlow was a woman named Catherine, who was the daughter of a baronet and a brigadier general, meaning the baronet and the brigadier general are the same person, of course. She didn't have one father who was a brigadier general and one father who was a baronet. Okay, and then we come to Lord Castlerossi. I just don't know how to say his name. Valentine Brown was his given name, and he was Irish, and at that time he would become the Earl of Kenmore, I think the 7th Earl of Kenmore, but at that time he was Viscount Castlerossi. He was almost exactly Dimitri's age, a few months older. He was 48, and he was mentioned by Dmitri in 1919. Dmitri knew him primarily because he was a great friend of Fred Cripps. So Dmitri and Valentine Brown were both friends of Fred Cripps, and we'll talk about Fred Cripps later. Anyway, that was how they met. So, yeah, Valentine Brown, he was an employee of, actually, I should go back and say Brownlow became, in 1940, became Beaverbrook's private secretary as Minister of Aviation. So Beaverbrook became Minister of Aviation, and Brownlow was in that capacity his private secretary. And so Castle Rossi too is an employee. So he, I quote from Wikipedia, after he became a regular columnist for the Sunday Express in April 1926, his witty but unmalicious commentary on contemporary public life made him the most celebrated gossip columnist in the British press of his time. And he had actually been a friend of Beaverbrook since 1915. But then he became a writer for the Sunday Express, and yeah, apparently one who was considered quite funny, but not malicious, so that's good. Gosh, I'm just repeating everything I just said. Yeah, and his second wife, this wife who Grunwald, who's kind of a snob, makes a point of referring to as a divorcee. Although, you know, Maria was a divorcee too, after all. Anyway, she was Enid Furness, and Dmitri had also known the Furnesses in earlier days. But, of course, Dmitri isn't present here. So what is Grunwald doing? Well, he's there primarily to scout things out with respect to Dmitri and whether he should be worried about Dmitri, whom he treats like a child overall. But one of the things that he does when they have this chance to speak alone is to sound Grunwald out about Russia, quite naturally. Dmitri aside, this was something of great interest to both Grunwald and Beaverbrook. And if you recall, Beaverbrook was an admirer of Stalin's. Talked about that in the last video. And so there's this kind of contradiction that I don't know what to do with Dmitri at this phase in his life, being anti-Soviet and anti-Stalin, but at the same time a close friend of Beaverbrook, and we're told by Grunwald even considering making a trip to the Soviet Union. So go figure. Anyway, Grunwald feels that he's listened to respectfully and that the questions are intelligent, and so he's impressed so far as it goes. This comment that he plays about Beaverbrook, that he plays the fool in public, I don't know enough about the man to know what he means by that. That's interesting. You know, he very much fits the bill, as Grunwald says, is the sort of Citizen Kane figure, the Hearst figure, you know, and nowadays these American billionaires very much fits this sort of overall picture. But was he this kind of canny person who played the fool in public? That wasn't the impression I got from reading what little I've been able to find about him, but, you know, Grunwald was actually there. So, yeah, so what do we have next time? Well, in 1915, we have Dmitri returning to Anatole France, one of his favorite authors, and returning to the game of chess, which the first time he had lost badly to Laming. And okay, when we return to 1939, we have Grunwald telling Maria about Beaverbrook's assessment of Dmitri. So that will likewise be very interesting. Let's see, was there anything else? I have a nagging feeling that there was something else I wanted to bring up. But anyway, I don't know how many people left memoirs that give us a peek into what life was like in the manor house of Lord Beaverbrook, but I appreciate this one from Grunwald, And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.